It is the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're here every single day from 5 to 6 talking about the local issues that matter to you most and taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Your emails as well at randykabc@gmail.com and search for the KABC News Blitz wherever you get your podcasts. At the end of last year, we took some really explosive calls from employees of the Los Angeles County Probation Department. Probation officers, a lot of field deputies that had been transferred to Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall because of a massive staffing shortage at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. There have been a lot of stories coming out, and I'm sure you've heard the LA County Board of Supervisors dealing with the state board that regulates and oversees Los Padrinos and other juvenile halls has called the conditions in those halls unsuitable for youth. And when you just hear that headline, it sure does sound scary. Turns out what was unsuitable was the lack of staffing. And part of the reason there was such a lack of staffing is there were several employees that did not want to go to work, that were using up vacation, taking time off, whatever they could do. And they were doing it for good reason, because they were being assaulted on a daily basis by the inmates at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. You got to remember, in Los Angeles County, where diversion is options 1, 2, and 3, the only people that are going to juvie are the worst of the worst of the worst. On top of that, our 4 years of George Gascon being LA County District Attorney, one of his blanket policies was never to try any child as an adult, which means up until the age of 26, you could have, quote, juvenile offenders that probably should have been in actual jail or prison in those juvenile halls. So we're not even talking about kids at this point. So we took a lot of those calls. They were eerie because so many people had so many similar stories about what was going on to them. And the probation department's chief was going to figure out a way to fix this and get people into a safe work environment where they were planning and going back to work. But we hadn't really seen any updates. We hadn't seen any plan. In fact, every time the Board of Supervisors would go and want to talk about what the plan was to deal with getting into compliance, they would never talk about what they were doing to make sure that the employees, the probation officers, are safe at their job. They wouldn't even talk about that. Well, this is the thing. Now we know yet another reason why so many probation officers have not wanted to go to work lately. It's because Rob Bonta is throwing them under the bus. Rob Bonta is going after them. Rob Bonta hosted a wild press conference about an hour ago. The story details of this indictment are so wild, it's just kind of hard to even believe. Maybe it's true, but maybe there's something else going on here. Because Rob Bonta, the Attorney General for the state of California, is alleging that 30 deputies at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall last year were orchestrating and organizing boy fights. Now, he called them gladiator fights, but we know that they were boy fights. And there has been video of fights emerging at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. We know there have been a lot of violent incidents. Again, evidenced by the several employees that we talked to last year that were either on leave, forced or unforced, because they have been physically assaulted by these inmate kids. And thanks to the regulations put on them, not only by the Probation Commission, but also by the state board that oversees juvenile halls, the officers cannot use force to restrain somebody. They cannot fight back. So what exactly is going on here? Is this story as it seems? Well, let's first hear from Rob Bonta, but I'm going to get you set up right now. If you happen to work in the LA County Probation Department, if you have friends or family that happen to work in the LA County Probation Department, and you know the real story about what's going on here, you do not have to use your real name. I understand retaliation is a real thing, but tell us what the heck is going on at Los Padrinos. 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222, because Rob Bonta is alleging that 30 deputies that are now indicted were organizing boy fights at Juvenile Hall. 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. I've got lines open for you if you, a friend or a family member, knows what's going on at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Let's hear from the man himself, Mr. Rob Bonta.
Thank you for joining me today. As I announce criminal charges I filed in a deeply disturbing case of child abuse and endangerment involving 30 officers at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall in Downey, California. Before we discuss the details, I want to acknowledge the work done by the members of the California DOJ's Division of Law Enforcement Special Investigations Team and Division of Criminal Law Special Prosecution Section, who investigated and are prosecuting this case. Their commitment to justice is why we're able to take action today.
Can we move past all the cliches and get to why you needed to grab everybody's attention? I'd love to know how this works, by the way. I don't know who gets notice about these things, but Bonta went on Zoom an hour ago with maybe 5 minutes notice. Fox 11 had to take it on their YouTube page. That's how I found it. I don't even know if this was on Bonta's YouTube page. So how many reporters are actually able to get over to that Zoom within enough time and ask the appropriate questions? Because there were only 2 reporters that asked questions at this presser.
DOJ's investigation began last January after we received leaked footage of a so-called Gladiator fight at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. The footage, which was later circulated widely by the media and on social media, shows one youth in the detention center.
Is he calling it a Gladiator fight because Gladiator 2 was just out in theaters? I mean, I've never heard that term before, but sure. Rob Bonta is alleging that 30 deputies of the LA County Probation Department working at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall were organizing gladiator fights. Are you not entertained? Someone had to do it.
Being attacked by a series of other youth who come at him one by one as detention officers stand by watching. Some officers are even seen laughing and shaking hands with the young people involved.
Now, this could be organizing of fights. Maybe there's some gambling going on. Maybe you can get some action on FanDuel with this. Or maybe, I don't know, the officers have to play along because it's the juvenile inmates that run that place. And if you don't go along with what they're doing, then you're going to get beat up and the department does not have your back. That's at least what we have seen with all the stories that came out at the end of last year.
Watching the video, the officers look more like referees or audience members at a prize fight, not adults charged with the care and supervision of young people. The officers don't step in, don't intervene, and don't protect their charges. After a thorough investigation, DOJ...
Could that be because they don't care and they want to see these boys beat each other up and maybe film it, get it on TikTok, get it on World Star? Or is it possible that we have restricted probation officers so much to the point where if they tried to intervene, they would be in trouble or they would get beat up and they have no recourse and they cannot fight back? And this is why so many people have retired, have quit, have gone on leave, which is why they started transferring field deputies off the streets that are supposed to be checking on all the people on probation and force them into Los Padrinos.
After a thorough investigation, DOJ discovered that the video was not a one-off isolated incident. Between July 1st and December 31st of 2023, detention officers allowed and in some instances even encouraged 69 gladiator fights to occur.
I'm going to say boy fights, but sure. Rob Bonta is alleging that these 30 deputies that have been indicted over the course of 6 months organized and watched and laughed at nearly 70 fights that took place on the grounds of Los Padrinos. This just seems a little weird.
Between 143 youth in their care. 69 fights in 6 months. We're talking about vulnerable youth, 143 teenagers between the ages
It's like a fight every other day.
143 teenagers between the ages of 12 and 18. Young people who are living under the guardianship of the criminal justice system in the custody of the juvenile hall and under the care of these officers.
So either what Rob Bonta is saying is that these juveniles were the victims of corrupt officers that were using them as meat bags for their entertainment, or we restricted the ability of probation officers to do their job so much that these juveniles are now running the joint. And we have a lot of anecdotal evidence of exactly what's been going on.
Officers who are in positions of authority, confidence, and trust. Positions of power that the 30 individuals were charged today abused. The individuals we charged today abused. Today, we're holding these 30 officers accountable through a grand jury indictment and criminal charges of child endangerment and abuse, conspiracy, and battery.
What do you think the staffing levels at Los Padrinos are going to be this week? I mean, if they had a staffing problem before, now they're really going to have one, whether these charges are true or not. And they just seem, at least from my opinion, and I haven't been in the juvenile halls, but I have talked to a lot of probation officers. It seems what Rob Bonta is alleging is kind of wild. But what do you think? Especially if you happen to have some inside info, you, a friend or a family member, work in LA County probation at Los Padrinos. You don't have to use your real name, but if you got some information to share on this, get it out there. 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Otherwise, everyone's going to go with Rob Bonta's narrative here that 30 probation officers were organizing boy fights, nearly 70 over the course of 6 months between July and December of 2023. 800-222-KABC is the phone number, 1-800-222-5222. Do you think probation officers at Los Padrinos were actually organizing, to quote Rob Bonta, gladiator fights among the inmates? 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Let's go to Peter in Pico Rivera. Peter, hello.
Hi, how are you, Randy?
Doing great.
First of all, thank you for just bringing this out in the open. I don't know if you knew, there was just a riot at one of our camp facilities, Camp Page, I believe in the city of Laverne, where one minor had to go to the hospital and another is charged with a crime and multiple officers were hurt. I don't think Rob Bonta was there, or he's going to talk about it. If I may, if you go to the hall today, this is what you have to expect as an officer. You can be spit at, things thrown at you. You can be sexually, physically, and emotionally abused, and there will be no consequence to the youth. And in terms of fights, Randy, there are about 5 to 10 fights. Now, the halls are run by gangs, and the reason they're run by gangs is because there's no deterrence. So these are gang fights. They call, especially when they initially come in, they're supposed to get, I don't know how you would call it, orientated, so they will fight each other, whatever rival gangs. I've seen hundreds of multiple fights, and there's no consequence. And they're really not fights. They're assaults. We are getting hurt by the hundreds. We have about maybe thousands, and that's not an exaggeration, of officers that are hurt. And nobody wants to talk about that. It is bad. It is extremely bad.
I got to say, Peter, I am in shock that your side of this story never seems to be getting told in the right avenues. Even the chief probation officer, when he talks to the board of supervisors, never mentions what's going on at the halls, what could be the root cause of all this incredibly violent behavior. But based on the stories you're saying and other officers that I've talked to over the last few months, that's exactly what's going on there. And this is not probation officers organizing boy fights.
No, this is tragic. Go to YouTube. You will see a whole bunch of fights that were, believe it or not, when they were smuggling phones. You'll see a whole bunch of fights there. Nobody said anything. And if you didn't know, there was a huge drug problem, and that's where a youth had overdosed and died. And that was a known that they were taking drugs every day. I was there when they were snorting drugs. It doesn't matter. They're not about youth. They're about power and money. The Board of Supervisors should be ashamed of themselves. The chief literally quit on us when he quit, and they brought him behind closed doors. They don't know what they're doing. They have no safety. If you ask them, where's the safety policy? They have none. No code of conduct. It's called deterrence. You need a specially handling unit to deal with violent youth. The other things that they did, they closed the camps. So we used to have 16 camps. You now have 3. Well, here's the game plan. They're going to close area offices. They're going to collapse. We have about maybe, hypothetically, 16. They're going to collapse area offices. And the real public safety net is probation. Probation is the one that offers services to deter criminal conduct from people that are on probation. And it affects the adult. That's what I'm talking about now. Not only the juveniles, but the adult. Nobody is supervising adults in the community, and nobody knows that. This is a huge problem. So you have sex offenders that are not being supervised, domestic violence, and you got a lot of officers that can't work on their jobs because they're being taken out. We have yet to hire one. Almost literally in 6 years have we placed anybody in the field. I'm telling you, this is a big, huge problem. I'm so glad that you're doing this because, that's why people have to retire early, 10 years early. You know, a lot of times we'll wait till hit the medical of 25 years. People are just taking the loss and say, I'll take you 20 years and I'll pay the rest. This is really bad, Randy. I don't know how else to explain it.
You just explained it so well, and I'm so glad that you did. And we're going to do everything we can to continue to get this story out there because this department is being attacked on all sides. And because people don't seem to somewhat connect the dots between the field deputies and the deputies that have to run the juvenile halls and the fact that we are taking people off the field at the same time where we're putting more and more people on probation, there's nobody to track all the people that are on probation. And when you have this kind of a hostile and dangerous work environment, good luck. They could spend all the advertising money they want. Good luck recruiting anybody to work at this department.
I think I was listening to your show today, Randy. I believe the host, forgive me. He said it very clearly. If you want to make a change, you got to vote for different people. You can't keep voting for the same people over and over and get different results. You got to vote for new people. We voted for a new district attorney. We voted for Prop 36, but you got to start at the top, and that starts with the governor on down, especially Ron Bonta. He should be ashamed of himself for what he did today. I'm not saying that we do things that are wrong. That comes with the territory, but at least you got to acknowledge that we are in a position where we are getting hurt every day. There's like 5 to 10 fights every day. They're not reported. There's so many, and they're not fights. They're assaults. Thank you.
You're so right, Peter. Thank you so much for calling in and sharing your story. I really, really appreciate it. People need to hear this. Thanks for the call, buddy. Call back anytime.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. He quoted John Phillips. Johnny said that today. We were talking about a different story. 800-222-KABC is the phone number, 1-800-222-5222. Attorney General Rob Bonta is charging 30 Los Angeles County probation officers with organizing, as he called it, juvenile gladiator fights at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. Do you think that's what's really going on at Los Padrinos? And if you or a friend or a family member happen to work in LA County probation and would like to tell the real story about what's going on down there that maybe Rob Bonta would like to hear, give us a call at 800-222-KABC. Don't have to use your real name, 1-800-222-5222. We'll hear more of your phone calls, and we'll hear more of Rob Bonta's bizarre press conference alleging that probation officers were organizing boy fights at Juvenile Hall. 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. We're We're taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is alleging that 30 probation officers at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall in Los Angeles County were organizing boy fights, gladiator matches among the inmates, and that's what he's charging them with. Do you think that's the real story about what's going on at Los Padrinos based on everything you've heard lately? And if you have any inside info, if you happen to work at LA County Probation or have a family member or a friend that does, get on the phone right now. There's a line open for you. You don't have to use your real name, but tell the real story and let's correct the record on what Rob Bonta is alleging at LA County Probation. 800-222-KABC is the phone number. 1-800-222-5222. 800-222-KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It is the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're here every single day from 5 to 6 talking about the local issues that matter to you most and taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. Your emails at randykabc@gmail.com. And the easiest way to get the podcast of this show, go to kabc.com/newsblitz, and all the links are right there. Give us a subscribe. I'm already seeing all the headlines coming out from our local news stations. 30 LA probation officers charged over, quote, gladiator fights at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. This is the narrative that Rob Bonta, the Attorney General, is putting out there. Rob Bonta has charged 30 probation officers at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall with child endangerment and neglect and battery for apparently enabling what he called gladiator fights between the inmates. Do you think that's what's really going on at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall? Based on everything you've heard not only today, but from previous callers you've heard on this station, we've talked to a lot of probation officers about the real conditions at Los Padrinos that are never brought up by the chief probation officer or by the LA County Board of Supervisors, including having the officers' hands tied that they cannot do anything when they are physically assaulted by these inmates, gangs taking over the juvenile halls. We just had a caller who had some pretty good inside info that these fights are assaults between the different rival gangs that have taken over the juvenile hall. What do you think is more believable? That 30 probation officers would throw away their entire career to gamble on boy fights? 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. If you happen to work at LA County Probation and want to anonymously share your story, you don't need to use your name. Give us a call right now. 800-222-KABC. You get a friend or a family member that works in the department, get them to call in right now. 800-222-KABC. Let's go back to Rob Bonta with his allegations that 30 probation officers were organizing boy fights.
Let today's charges be a clear warning up and down our state. If you abuse your power, we'll hold you accountable. If you abuse your power and break the law, we will hold you accountable. Today's criminal...
Unless the way you broke the law was with campaign finance donations or doing favors for donors, that's a whole other story for another day. But Rob Bonta, don't you forget that somebody right now is definitely mentioning your name to the feds, and that somebody is probably Shang Tao.
Today's criminal charges are the latest example of our ongoing efforts to combat systemic injustice in our criminal justice system.
Oh, of course, because what's been going on at the juvenile halls is such an injustice. You remember, the state got out of the juvie business, so they have kicked all of their state facilities down to the counties. So now the county only has a few facilities, and they're overcrowded. And thanks to George Gascon, we weren't trying anybody as an adult, so the worst of the worst got in there. And you don't get out of juvenile hall till you're 26, so we have young adults in there who are getting very violent. And apparently the officers cannot do anything. So they get physically assaulted and they go on leave. And it's a wonder why they have such a staffing shortage. But no. None of that's what's happening. What's really happening is they're all victims of these organizers of gladiator fights.
Separate and apart from this criminal prosecution, we're taking steps to address serious ongoing deficiencies in the treatment and conditions of youth.
Yes, and of course, the state board that oversees Los Padrinos said, well, the staffing is so bad that we need to close this facility. And what? Send all of these inmates out into the public? I mean, The LA County Board of Soups has talked endlessly about wanting to close the hall, just like they want to close Men's Central Jail without an alternative to replace it, because we keep electing people that are insane.
At Los Angeles County Juvenile Halls last fall, as part of a separate civil suit we brought against the county, I announced an amended judgment with the county that requires additional monitoring and strengthened protections to ensure the safety and well-being of youth at the facilities, including changes to policy and practice, staffing, and training.
So now we're going to make it even harder for the probation officers to do their jobs. Remember, the situations got so bad, and so many people were out on medical leave, they started forcing field deputies, the other side of probation that deals with checking in on people that are on probation, on ankle monitors, what have you. They can't do their job. They have to go to the juvenile hall, and they're not even trained for that, and they cannot defend themselves. This is an impossible situation, and it's no surprise why there's such a staffing shortage.
And training. Again, that is a separate case. That is a civil case. The case I'm talking about today that we're announcing is a criminal case, completely separate from that civil case. When individuals enter the system, it becomes our duty to protect their health, their safety, their well-being, to ensure they are held accountable for their crimes, serve their due sentence, and have the ability to rehabilitate and safely re-enter.
Doesn't sound like anybody's rehabilitating when the inmates are running the facility, allegedly.
Our communities, especially young people who should have their whole lives ahead of them. That's hardly...
Well, they do. Let's not forget, you age out of juvie no matter what your crime was. At 26, you're let loose, and some people are well aware of that. And apparently, there are no consequences for doing drugs, violent behavior, disobeying staff. So why not just do whatever the heck you want in there?
That's hardly possible.
And heck, on the outside, you got Holly Mitchell advocating for you to be released out into the public.
That's hardly possible if they endure abuse and trauma in the system, especially at the hands of those who are charged with their care. Those charged with their...
Rob Bonta is alleging that the inmates are being abused by the deputies at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. The deputies at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall are alleging they're being abused by the inmates, and the state and the county won't let them defend themselves. Which story do you believe? 800-222-KABC.
Those charged with their care are abusing them. That is wrong, especially in such formative years. These young people deserve every opportunity to turn their lives around and move forward as productive members of society, to leave crime in the past so we can all be safer in the future.
How's that working out?
We can and must do better. At California DOJ, we're striving to. We need transparency and accountability, shining a light.
And by the way, I haven't even counted at this point. Is that like 6 or 7 accountabilities?
Shining a light on abuse and injustice is the first step to eradicating it. The second is holding those responsible to account for their crimes. That's what we're doing today. Before I open it up to questions, I want to thank the members of my team.
No, we don't need to thank the members of your team. There you go. We'll go to some of the questions next, but Rob Bonta is alleging that 30 officers of LA County Probation were enabling and sometimes organizing what he calls gladiator-style fights between the inmates at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. Are you buying this? 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. We're taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC on Rob Bonta's allegations that 30 probation officers at Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall were enabling and sometimes organizing, quote, gladiator fights between the inmates. 800-222-KABC. Let's go to Tim on the 405. Tim, hello.
Hey, how you doing, Randy?
Doing great.
Hey, yeah, I don't really have any information on that. It's just I think people would be surprised to learn that some kids get arrested on purpose so that they can go into juvenile hall after 10th grade because the law gives them a lower requirement for high school graduation, even if they're enrolled in a court school for just one day. They get to come back out and they have half the number of credits required to graduate high school. And they also get a public defender in some counties, particularly Riverside, who's particularly aggressive about protecting them from things like expulsion from the school system.
Wow, I'm not surprised at all, but you could be living on Easy Street if you just get yourself into juvie.
Yeah, there seems to be an effort in California to include them under the umbrella of protections for foster youth, and which gets them, caseworkers, attorneys, and again, they're quite aggressive in my experience. I had a student who brought a weapon to school and was selling drugs, had all of the incriminating evidence on him, and I think he stayed about 2 weeks in juvenile hall, and again, his public defender came out very aggressive, working against the schools, and it just became untenable. He wound up getting himself just back into school, and unfortunately, he didn't go in there after his 10th grade year. That's when that provision of half those high school graduation requirements. So it's pretty surprising, but it was also a bit of a surprise that kids caught wind of that and will get themselves intentionally put into juvenile.
That is crazy and so LA. Thanks so much for bringing that to our attention, Tim. That is wild. Thanks so much for the call. 800-222-KABC is the phone number. More of your calls and more of Bonta's wild press conference next. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. We're getting your reaction to Rob Bonta's bizarre press conference alleging 30 LA County probation officers had enabled and sometimes organized gladiator fights among the inmates of Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall. Let's go to Cornelius in LA. Cornelius, hello.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Randy.
Doing great.
Good. No, each time an officer goes into the facility, they ask us basically three questions. Will I be safe? Will I be reprimanded for doing my job? And will I be held over for additional 8 hours after completing my shift? I mean, Los Padrinos is toxic. It's unsafe. There's no consequences for the minors or adults in our care. They basically do as they please. The officers are told to observe and report. And then the problem is no one reads or acts on the reported bad behavior. So, yeah, it's just a complete mess there.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought up about the holdovers. That is so unbelievable. You're in a facility where you can't even have your cell phone with you. You have an 8-hour shift, and with no notice whatsoever, your supervisors, because of understaffing, would say, oh, you're staying another 8 hours. Forget whatever life you had planned. Maybe your kid's at daycare. None of that matters.
Correct. And you may not even have food because you weren't expected to stay.
It is unconscionable that this side of the story doesn't get told, and we just want to keep painting the probation officers who have to deal with this madness as the villains of this story. Cornelius, thanks so much for calling in and sharing your story.
All right.
Thank you. Let's go back to Rob Bonta as we answer some questions.
The first question comes from Rebecca Ellis. You are now unmuted.
Hey, Rebecca here with the LA Times. You described one of the main videos that was pretty widely circulated in the media. Can you give some examples of other gladiator fights, quote unquote, that you saw during your review of the footage?
She wants to see more videos.
Yeah, let me first say that there was a lot of video footage to review, and during the 6-month period that's the subject of the grand jury indictment, we saw additional videos of juvenile probation officers standing by, standing around as those in their care, the juveniles who they were charged with taking care of, fought without any intervention,
Were they allowed to intervene?
Without any attempts to keep them safe, to protect their welfare, their physical safety. And
would they be able to protect themselves if they were getting assaulted?
And we saw that multiple times. And we have 69 different incidents that we identified, all with striking similarities The one that you may be referencing with the serial gladiator fights with one individual and multiple other youth detainees was the.
Well, they're fighting over Cheerios? Lucky Charms? So how exactly are the probation officers the ones at fault for the inmates fighting over who got the Fruit Loops?
They weren't all about serial fights with one individual, multiple others. Most were not, actually. But they did have multiple gladiator type fights between individuals with probation officers employed by LA County right there in the room, watching, not intervening, not keeping the young people they were charged with taken care of.
This is the story that's going to go out there tonight, and all the local news stations are going to have to report on what Rob Bonta, the top law enforcement official in the state, is alleging. But I really wish the other side of the story could get out there, and it's tough. Like, we can do what we can here. Radio doesn't, especially this show and this station, we don't have to follow some of the same practices that TV news does. They need someone to go on the record, on the air. And for fear of retaliation and losing your pension, I understand why most probation officers don't want to. But if anybody wants to be that person to take that first step, email me at randykabc@gmail.com. I'll put you in front of the right people. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC.